What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. Ever since its release, Hearthstone has been pretty much just an ever-changing game, and comparing the cards and mechanics we have today to what we had in the past is actually kinda crazy almost sometimes, since it almost seems like they were just two completely different games. Unfortunately, part of this effort to be constantly new and fresh means that a lot of cards have been removed or just changed completely in Hearthstone. So today we're going over another group of cards that just didn't make it into the game. And I always love these topics. I think it's super fun to look back at the early days. So if you guys enjoy the video too, definitely hit that like button and let's begin. So first up, we're looking at a card called Dark Summoner. Dark Summoner was a 5 mana 5/3 minion with the text, "The first minion you play each turn costs 3 less." It was removed from the game during one of the alpha patches, and we're unlikely to ever see it again honestly. But it's interesting to see how good Dark Summoner might have actually been. You know, on paper it seems like it might have actually been pretty dang strong, but in actuality it's a little bit unclear. You know, paying 5 mana for a minion with only 3 health is usually pretty bad, to be honest. I mean, it would just die to Frostbolt, Fiery War Axe, Wrath, and tons of other cheap removal. There's also the fact that this card trades with some 1-drops. I mean, this card trades with Flame Imp, trades with pretty much every 2-drop almost that's played, and the 5 attack doesn't really make up for the low health at all. As for the effect though, I mean, it's definitely a really strong one. It's a pretty cool effect. It's kind of like this giant version of a pint-sized summoner. Unfortunately though, it might not actually be as good as it seems. You know, more expensive or different versions of things like Summoning Portal might be pretty cool since they could potentially let you combo off of stuff, but a bigger version of pint-sized summoner isn't entirely all that exciting. I mean, this card's probably just gonna die before you can do anything cool with it. If it does survive somehow though, you can play a 9-drop on turn 6, which is pretty darn cool. I mean, you could play Ragnaros on turn 6, but it's definitely not worth playing 5 mana 5/3s in your deck probably. In general, it seems like Blizzard isn't entirely a big fan of specifically that sort of like pint-sized summoner, you know, cost reduction effect, since this card was of course removed and we haven't seen any cards with similar effects since, or the same effect I guess. Still though, it's cool to see what Blizzard was kind of exploring with some of these early designs, and even though Dark Summoner might not have been that great of a card, it's definitely a cool one, and who knows, maybe it had some crazy combos that could have been super fun or super strong. Next up, we're looking at a card called Demoralizing Roar. So this card is a 1 mana druid spell that gives all enemy minions -3 attack the turn that you play it. It was removed during an unknown patch during the alpha phase. Let me remind you guys that the alpha was never actually available for testing. It was only friends and family alpha, so it was only something that the people at Blizzard got to play around with. But this card itself actually explores some really interesting design space, to be honest. You know, there's some effects that lower the enemy minions attacks, but they're usually in classes like Priest and Paladin, not necessarily Druid though. Also, most of them lower just one minion's attack, like maybe Shrinkmeister or Humility, while Demoralizing Roar hits all enemy minions. Now, if we take a look at how good this card actually is, it's kind of a weird effect that's a little quirky, but in actuality, it's possible that this card might have actually been extremely powerful. You know, if you and your opponent both have a really big board and you want to trade your minions with each other, this card essentially just saves all of your minions a bunch of damage and lets all of your minions trade so much more favorably. It's kind of like a Totemic Might almost, except it hits all of your minions, not just totems, and gives them +3 health, but it only works if your opponent has a board and you want to trade with them, I guess. If you and your opponent have a big board, Double Roar is pretty much as good as a 2 mana one-sided board wipe. Now, normally cards this narrow or this niche aren't that playable, since this card requires both you and your opponent to have a, you know, pretty hefty board, but still, you know, this is a Druid card, and Druid is usually going to have some amount of minions on the board and be trading with minions quite a bit. Additionally, this card only costs 1 mana, which means that it's really easy to slot into any given turn, and cheap situational cards are usually better than expensive ones that are a little bit more generic. Demoralizing Roar is probably a pretty decent card and explores some really interesting design space, but might have been removed because of the issues with fun mechanics that Blizzard kind of has. You know, they don't really like cards that hurt your opponent's cards, as well as it might have been removed for balance reasons. I'm not entirely sure how this one might have playtested out, but Blizzard usually doesn't like things that messes with your opponent's cards too much. You know, the cards that make your opponent discard or destroy their mana crystals or stuff like that. Sure though, Demoralizing Roar definitely affects the board, so maybe it was just fair game, but it also kind of completely reverses how the opponent planned combat out and makes all of their, minion play feel pretty disappointing, honestly, because they just get taken out for free almost. Either way though, the card pretty much had no chance of staying in the game for very long and eventually got removed from the game. Next up, we have a card called Town Beggar. So Town Beggar was removed at some point during the alpha phase as well, and is a 1/1 minion for 1 mana cost with the ability, at the end of your turn you have a 25% chance to draw a card. Now this is a pretty weird looking card, honestly. The ability triggers on the end of your turn, kind of like how Nat Pagle originally used to before he got nerfed. So at least you get the chance to draw an extra card before it gets chilled, but oh man, this card is getting killed. I mean, 1 health is pretty terrible, to be honest. This card's gonna die to just everything, hero powers, spells, every minion really. And if this card dies the turn it comes down, it's essentially just a 1 mana 1/1 creature that has the ability draw 1/4 of a card, and that's just not good enough to see play. If you play this on turn 1, your opponent might have to coin their hero power to kill it, or maybe wait until the next turn, but that doesn't really make the card all that much better. And even if it lives, I mean, 25% chance to draw a card is actually pretty low if you think about it. So it definitely wouldn't have been strong enough to get played a ton in Constructed. Still though, this card is such a weird design. I mean, we almost never see like this 25% chance of something on a card specifically. It's kind of strange to see this sort of effect on a 1 mana common as well. I mean, beyond that, it's kind of hard to describe, but the design and flavor of this card don't really fit all that well with Hearthstone in its current form today, so it was removed for that reason. Now next up, I have to be honest, we're looking at a card that didn't actually make it into the game, but it was one that got scrapped from the design of Hearthstone, and it's a card called Ozumat. Now again, Ozumat is kind of a weird part of this list because the card or attempted designs behind it never were actually revealed. What we do know is that Ozumat is supposedly like the ruler of all the Krakens, and he's this guy, this big powerful dude that serves the old gods. And according to Ben Brode, Blizzard was actually trying to create this card really hard because they had some super awesome art and story behind it and just awesome flavor. But Blizzard actually had a pretty difficult time making a playable version of mechanics for it that also worked thematically. I believe it was removed at some point during the alpha phase, and some of the ideas for its design eventually actually helped to make the card Deathwing. It's kind of cool though that the way this card was designed involved picking cool abilities and stats to go along with the story, rather than making a card mechanics and stuff and then picking the story and art that fits with it. In general though, this methodology of design makes cards a lot more flavorful and definitely a lot more fun to play with and look at, and I'm interested to see how the developers actually design cards. I'm sure they definitely go both ways sometimes. It's definitely tricky to see, who knows. Maybe something we'll take a look at in a future video. Now our next card on the list is something that goes by the name of Grounding Totem, and it's kind of a little bit like Ozumat in that we don't actually know that much about the actual card itself. The only thing we know for a fact about Grounding Totem is that it was removed during the alpha phase, and that Blizzard actually tried a lot of different things with its card design. However, there were a couple of leaks that suggest one of the things Blizzard was testing with Grounding Totem was it kind of being sort of like a taunt, but for spells. So it somehow kind of redirected the next spell that would hit another one of your minions or your face and then died, or it made it so that you could only cast spells on that minion. And this is actually pretty cool to see. I mean, we kind of have this effect with the Mage Secret Spellbender, but Spellbender doesn't see all that much play, and Spell Taunt, or whatever the mechanic might have been called, isn't something we've really seen a ton before or really gotten to play with at all in Constructed, even in Arena as well, and good cards with that mechanic would definitely change the face of competitive Hearthstone. I mean, if it was actually playable in a very solid version, it could be such a cool mechanic to play with, or maybe frustrating. It's hard to say. It's definitely possible that Blizzard decided this mechanic was just unfun or just bad for the game, and as a result developed the Fairy Dragon mechanic of just not being targeted by spells or hero powers instead, as a more like proactive sort of version of the effect in terms of like what your opponent can do about it. I mean, whatever the reason, it would definitely be pretty cool if we got to see this mechanic return at some point in the future. Who knows? I mean, maybe it would have been pretty cool. So what are some of your favorite cards that were removed from the game? Definitely let us know in the comments below, and looks like that's going to be it for me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.